The restaurant was alive with the usual chaos, a cacophony of clattering pans, sizzling oil, and sharp voices barking orders across the kitchen. Ray was standing by the industrial sink, elbow-deep in sudsy water, his hands pruny from hours of scrubbing. It was a normal night, or so he thought. The sharp-tongued head chef, Luis, was cursing about an overdone steak, while waitresses darted back and forth like swallows, balancing trays loaded with steaming plates. Ray wiped his forehead with his shoulder, sighed, and reached for another greasy skillet when the door to the kitchen burst open. "All right, listen up," barked Mr. Carter, the owner and self-proclaimed king of the restaurant world. His booming voice silenced the kitchen, except for the faint hiss of the fryers. Mr. Carter stood with his arms crossed, his pristine suit completely out of place in the sweaty, chaotic kitchen. He looked around at the staff, his face a mixture of authority and annoyance. "Do any of you think you could do my job for a week? Huh? Any takers?" The staff exchanged glances, a mix of curiosity and amusement on their faces. Carter was known for his theatrics, but this outburst was unusual even for him. Ray kept his head down, scrubbing a particularly stubborn pan, hoping to avoid eye contact. He had no time for this nonsense, his shift was long enough as it was. It all started because of a staff meeting earlier that day. Carter had been berating his team for what he called a lack of vision, blaming them for the restaurant's recent slump in customer reviews. Tensions were high, and it didn't help that Carter had a habit of talking down to everyone, from the sous chef to the dishwashers. After one particularly biting comment about how even a monkey could do your jobs better, someone, no one could remember who, muttered, "Even the dishwasher could run this place better than you." Carter's ears had perked up. "The dishwasher," he repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think a dishwasher could manage my restaurant?" That was all it took for the idea to snowball. By the time the meeting ended, Carter had issued a challenge: anyone who thought they could do his job would get the chance. The catch? They had to manage the restaurant for an entire week while he went on vacation. If they succeeded, Carter promised to consider a hefty bonus. Now, as Carter stood there, surveying the room, he repeated his question. "So, who's it going to be? Who's brave enough to step up?" To Ray's horror, Luis turned to him with a mischievous grin. "What about Ray?" the chef said loudly, drawing laughter from the room. "He's always watching everything. Bet he's got a management strategy brewing in that quiet head of his." Ray froze, feeling a dozen pairs of eyes on him. I'm just the dishwasher," he stammered, waving a soapy hand as if to dismiss the idea. "I wouldn't know the first thing about managing a restaurant." But Carter was intrigued. His eyes narrowed as he studied Ray, who avoided his gaze by scrubbing even harder. "Ray, huh?" Carter said, his tone both skeptical and amused. "You've been here 3 years? You've seen how things work. What do you say?" "I say no," Ray said quickly, hoping that would be the end of it. But Luis wasn't letting him off the hook that easily. "Come on, Ray," the chef teased. "What's the worst that could happen? You can't do worse than Carter." The room erupted in laughter, but Carter wasn't amused. He raised a hand to silence them and took a step closer to Ray. "Tell you what," he said. "You take the challenge, and if you survive the week, I'll personally pay you double what you make now. Deal?" Ray hesitated. Double pay sounded tempting. He could finally catch up on his overdue rent and maybe even save a little. But the thought of being in charge of the entire restaurant was terrifying. "I'm not sure." Before he could finish, Carter clapped him on the back, a little harder than necessary. "Good man," he said. "It's settled. You're in charge starting tomorrow." The kitchen burst into applause, some genuine, most sarcastic. Ray's stomach dropped. What had he just agreed to? That night, Ray lay awake in his tiny studio apartment, replaying the events in his head. What if he failed? What if he messed up so badly that the restaurant went under? But another thought kept creeping in, one he couldn't shake. What if he didn't fail? What if he actually pulled this off? For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope. The next morning, Ray arrived at the restaurant an hour early. The place felt different without Carter's larger-than-life presence. Ray stood in the dining room, trying to imagine himself as the boss. He was greeted by Luis, who smirked as he handed Ray a clipboard. "Here you go, boss," he said, clearly enjoying the absurdity of the situation. Ray looked at the clipboard, which was filled with incomprehensible schedules, supply lists, and notes. His heart sank. He had no idea where to start. But as the day went on, he found himself falling into a rhythm. He called a quick meeting with the staff, where he laid out his plan: keep things simple, communicate openly, and work as a team. To his surprise, most of them nodded along, even Luis. The first day was a whirlwind. Ray juggled orders, calmed a frustrated waitress, and even stepped in to help the line cooks when they fell behind. By the end of the night, he was exhausted but proud. They hadn't fallen apart, not yet, anyway. The second day brought its own challenges. A major delivery of fresh produce was delayed, and the head waitress called out sick. Ray scrambled to fill the gaps, running between the kitchen and the dining room like a madman. But something strange started to happen. The staff began to rally around him. Luis, who had spent most of the first day mocking Ray, started offering advice. The other waitresses pitched in to cover their absent coworkers' tables. Even the busboy, who usually slacked off, seemed inspired by Ray's determination. By the third day, Ray was starting to believe he might actually survive the week. Customers were happy, the staff seemed to respect him, and the restaurant was running smoothly, mostly. But just as Ray was beginning to feel confident, disaster struck. A pipe burst in the kitchen, flooding the floor and forcing them to shut down for the afternoon. Ray felt his fragile confidence crumble. How could he possibly fix this? As the plumber worked on the pipe, Ray gathered the staff for a meeting. "Look, I know this is bad," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But we're not going to let one setback ruin everything. We'll clean up, reopen for dinner, and make tonight our best service yet. Agreed?" To his amazement, the staff cheered. Luis even clapped him on the shoulder. "You've got guts, kid," he said with a grin. "Let's do it." That night, the restaurant was packed. Customers didn't seem to care about the earlier closure, they were just happy to see the place bustling again. Ray moved through the dining room, greeting guests and checking on the staff. For the first time, he felt like a real manager. As he locked up that night, Ray couldn't help but smile. He still had a long way to go, but he was starting to believe in himself. Little did he know, the biggest challenges, and surprises, were yet to come. Ray's alarm buzzed sharply at 6 a.m., dragging him from a fitful sleep. The previous 3 days had been grueling, but somehow, against all odds, the restaurant was still standing. Yet as he stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror of his tiny bathroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. His face was tired, his eyes hollow, but there was also a flicker of something new, a steely determination that surprised even him. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was starting to figure things out. But with 4 days left in his impromptu trial as manager, Ray knew he couldn't let his guard down. Arriving at the restaurant before dawn, Ray found himself alone in the quiet dining room. The stillness was eerie, the tables neatly set, the chairs lined up in perfect rows. It felt like the calm before a storm. He walked through the kitchen, tracing the steps he had taken countless times as a dishwasher. Everything looked the same, yet it felt entirely different. It was his responsibility now. The thought sent a shiver through him, but he pushed it aside. He didn't have time for doubt. As the staff trickled in, Ray noticed something he hadn't seen before. they were starting to greet him with genuine respect. Luis, who had once treated Ray like an invisible background character in the restaurant's drama, nodded at him with a subtle grin. "Morning, boss," the chef said, his tone light but not mocking. Ray didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded back, pretending it was no big deal. The morning rush was chaotic, as always. Orders flooded in, and the kitchen was a symphony of sizzling pans, chopping knives, and shouted instructions. Ray had learned to float between the front of the house and the kitchen, checking in with the servers to make sure customers were happy while keeping an eye on the cooks to ensure the food went out on time. It was a delicate dance, one he was still learning, but he was starting to find his rhythm. But then, just as things seemed to be settling into place, the first major curveball of the day hit. A tall, wiry man in a pressed suit strolled into the kitchen, clipboard in hand. He looked around with the detached air of someone who had seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Health Inspector," the man announced curtly, flashing his badge. Ray's stomach dropped. He had completely forgotten that the health inspection was scheduled for this week. Mr. Carter had always handled these things, and Ray had no idea what to expect. The inspector began his tour, his sharp eyes darting into every corner of the kitchen. He measured the temperatures of the fridges, checked the cleanliness of the counters, and even peeked into the storage closet where the cleaning supplies were kept. Ray followed him anxiously, trying to answer the inspector's rapid-fire questions while simultaneously keeping the kitchen running smoothly. The staff picked up on the tension and worked with an almost military precision, determined not to let Ray down. Luis, who was usually the first to complain about extra work, wiped down every surface until it gleamed. The busboy, who had a reputation for cutting corners, took it upon himself to reorganize the pantry. Even the servers, who weren't usually involved in the kitchen's inner workings, pitched in where they could. By the time the inspector left, Ray was drenched in sweat, but the man gave him a small nod of approval. "Looks good," he said. "You'll get the official report in a few days, but I don't see anything to worry about." The kitchen erupted in cheers, and Ray allowed himself a brief moment of pride. They had done it. They had passed their first real test. But there was no time to celebrate. The lunch rush was looming, and Ray knew better than to think the day's challenges were over. Sure enough, just as the dining room began to fill with hungry customers, disaster struck again. The server station's tablet system crashed, leaving the waitstaff unable to input orders. Panic spread through the team as they realized they would have to take orders by hand and run them to the kitchen the old-fashioned way. Ray took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "All right, listen up," he called, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. "We're going analog for the rest of the day. Servers, write down your orders and hand them directly to Luis. Luis, call out each order as it comes in so the cooks can stay organized. We've got this." The staff scrambled to adjust, and for a few tense minutes, it seemed like the whole system might collapse. But then something remarkable happened. The team started to gel in a way Ray had never seen before. Servers moved with newfound urgency, cooks shouted confirmations back and forth, and even Luis seemed energized by the challenge. By the end of the lunch rush, the team was exhausted but triumphant. Customers left satisfied, and one even pulled Ray aside on his way out. "You've got a great team here," the man said with a smile. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." The compliment bolstered Ray's confidence, but he knew the hardest part of the day was still ahead. The dinner service was always the most demanding, and with the tablet system still down, they would have to rely on the same manual process they had used at lunch. As the dinner crowd poured in, Ray felt the pressure mounting. The restaurant was packed, and the kitchen was running at full capacity. Orders came in faster than the cooks could keep up, and tensions began to fray. Luis snapped at one of the line cooks for being too slow, and a server accidentally spilled a tray of drinks on a customer. Ray stepped in, calming tempers and solving problems as they arose. He worked alongside the staff, running food to tables, helping Luis plate dishes, and even cleaning up the spilled drinks. He wasn't just managing, he was leading by example. But just when it seemed like they might make it through the night unscathed, the power suddenly flickered and went out. The restaurant plunged into darkness, and a collective gasp swept through the dining room. Ray's heart sank. A power outage was the last thing they needed. Thinking quickly, Ray grabbed a flashlight from the storage room and handed it to Luis. "Keep cooking," he said. "Use the gas burners for now." He turned to the servers. "Light candles for the tables and let the customers know we're handling it. Apologize, but stay calm. They'll take their cues from us." The staff sprang into action, and within minutes, the restaurant was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. To Ray's surprise, the customers seemed charmed by the impromptu ambience, and many even complimented the staff on their quick thinking. When the power finally came back on an hour later, the restaurant erupted in applause. Ray felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he didn't let it show. He still had work to do. By the time the last customer left and the staff began cleaning up, Ray was running on pure adrenaline. As he locked up for the night, he couldn't help but marvel at what they had accomplished. It hadn't been perfect, but they had survived another day. Back in his apartment, Ray collapsed onto his couch, too tired to even take off his shoes. His mind raced with thoughts of the day's events, the health inspection, the tablet crash, the power outage. It felt like an endless series of obstacles, but somehow, he and his team had overcome them all. As he drifted off to sleep, Ray realized something important. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a dishwasher or a temporary manager. He was a leader. And he was starting to believe that he might actually be good at it. Ray awoke the next morning feeling the weight of the week pressing down on him. The aches in his back and legs were a reminder of the long hours he'd spent on his feet, but the bigger burden was the mental strain of keeping the restaurant afloat. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, trying to summon the energy to get up. The halfway point had passed, but the finish line felt as distant as ever. Still, the knowledge that he'd made it this far fueled him to keep going. If he could survive 3 more days, he'd not only prove Carter wrong but also prove something to himself. At the restaurant, Ray arrived early again, knowing preparation was half the battle. He walked through the dining room, straightened the chairs, and checked the day's reservations. It was a busy Friday, which meant the stakes were even higher. Fridays brought regulars, families, and date-night couples, and their expectations were always sky-high. He needed everything to run smoothly. Luis was already in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades behind a counter. "Morning, boss," Luis said without looking up. Ray caught a hint of genuine warmth in his voice, a stark contrast to the sarcastic tone of their earlier interactions. "Morning," Ray replied, feeling a pang of gratitude. Luis's grudging respect had grown into something more supportive over the last few days, and Ray knew he couldn't have come this far without him. The day began quietly, but Ray knew better than to trust the calm. By lunchtime, the first storm hit. A waitress rushed into the kitchen, wide-eyed and flustered. "We've got a problem," she stammered. "What is it?" Ray asked, bracing himself. "There's a group of 12 that just showed up, no reservation. They're saying it's a birthday and they want a full-course dinner." Ray's mind raced. A party that size without warning could throw the whole kitchen into chaos, especially during the lunch rush. But turning them away wasn't an option, they couldn't afford to lose that kind of business. "All right," Ray said, thinking quickly. "We'll seat them in the back corner. Let them know there might be a bit of a wait. Luis, can the kitchen handle this if we prioritize their order?" Luis grunted, wiping his hands on his apron. "It's gonna be tight, but we'll manage. Just keep the other orders staggered." Ray nodded, stepping into the dining room to greet the group personally. They were a lively bunch, already laughing and joking as they settled into their seats. "Welcome," Ray said with a smile. "Happy birthday. We'll get started on your orders right away. Thanks for your patience." The birthday group turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and other diners couldn't help but be drawn into the celebratory atmosphere. Ray noticed families smiling, couples leaning closer, and even the staff seemed to feed off the positive energy. By the time the group finished their meal and left a generous tip, the whole restaurant felt lighter. But the respite didn't last long. Just as the dinner rush began, a delivery driver arrived with bad news. Half the produce order didn't come in, he explained, looking apologetic. "Some mix-up at the warehouse. You're short on greens, tomatoes, and a few other things." Ray felt a cold knot of panic form in his stomach. Salads were a key part of the menu, especially for the dinner crowd. Without the missing ingredients, they'd be in trouble. Luis stepped in, his voice steady and commanding. "We'll adapt. We've got other vegetables. I can whip up a roasted veggie side dish as a substitute. It's not the same, but it'll work." "Do it," Ray said, grateful once again for Luis's experience. He turned to the servers. "Let the customers know about the change before they order. Sell it like it's a special feature, not a compromise. Make it sound exciting." The team rose to the challenge, and to Ray's astonishment, the roasted vegetable dish became a hit. Customers raved about it, with some even asking if it would become a permanent menu item. Ray couldn't believe it. What had started as a crisis had turned into an opportunity. As the night wore on, the restaurant hummed with activity. Ray moved between the dining room and the kitchen, keeping an eye on every detail. He helped bus tables, soothed a frustrated customer whose steak wasn't cooked to his liking, and even jumped in to refill water glasses when the servers got overwhelmed. Then, just as the evening seemed to be winding down, another curveball hit. A waiter came rushing in, pale and out of breath. "Ray, we've got a VIP at table 7, he said, his voice trembling. Ray frowned. "VIP? Who?" "It's a food critic," the waiter whispered. "I recognized him from a blog I follow. He's big, like, really big. If he writes a bad review, we're done." Ray felt his heart skip a beat. A food critic on a Friday night, during one of the busiest services of the week? It was the kind of pressure he hadn't prepared for. But there was no time to panic. "All right," Ray said, taking a deep breath. "Let's treat him like any other customer, no special treatment, no fuss. Just make sure everything is perfect. Luis, double-check every dish before it goes out. Servers, keep an eye on table 7 but don't hover." The next hour was a blur. Every time Ray glanced at table 7, the critic was either jotting down notes or snapping photos of his food. Ray's nerves were stretched to their limit, but he forced himself to stay focused. When the critic finally left, Ray felt like he could breathe again. The staff gathered around him, their faces tense with anticipation. "Do you think we did okay?" one of the waitresses asked. "I guess we'll find out," Ray said, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they had done their best. By the end of the night, the exhaustion was bone deep, but so was the sense of accomplishment. As Ray locked up the restaurant, he realized that something had shifted. The staff wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore, they were working for each other, for the pride of keeping the restaurant alive. And Ray wasn't just surviving the week, he was growing into his role, one challenge at a time. Back at home, Ray sank into his couch, letting the events of the day wash over him. He thought about the food critic, the birthday party, the delivery mishap. Each crisis had felt insurmountable in the moment, but they had faced it together. For the first time, Ray allowed himself to believe that he might actually make it through the week. But deep down, he knew the biggest test was still to come. The dawn of Saturday brought a different kind of energy to Ray. It wasn't the exhaustion that usually accompanied his mornings but a sharp edge of anticipation. The end of the week was in sight, but it wasn't time to relax. Saturdays were notoriously unpredictable at the restaurant, and Ray knew better than to assume he'd skate through unscathed. He spent an extra few minutes mentally preparing himself before heading out, reviewing the lessons of the past days. Leadership wasn't about knowing everything, it was about being ready for anything. When Ray arrived, the staff was already buzzing. Saturdays brought early brunchers, and the kitchen was alive with the clatter of pans and the sizzle of eggs on the grill. Ray stepped into the controlled chaos, grabbing an apron and pitching in where needed. He flipped pancakes, plated omelets, and even refilled coffee cups for customers. Every task felt like a small victory, a reminder of how far he'd come since Monday. By mid-morning, the first hiccup of the day arrived. A large group of regulars, mostly older couples who came for the same dishes every Saturday, found themselves seated at a table where the AC had stopped working. Complaints rolled in immediately. "It's too hot here," one of the men grumbled, loosening his tie. "Why can't you just move us to another spot?" Ray stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "I completely understand, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Unfortunately, we're fully booked, but I'll have fans brought over immediately. Your comfort is our priority." He gestured to a busboy, who quickly set up a pair of portable fans near the table. The group seemed placated, but Ray knew this kind of situation could spiral if not handled carefully. He instructed the server assigned to the table to give them extra attention, offering complimentary drinks and desserts to smooth things over. By the time they left, their initial irritation had turned into smiles. Ray barely had time to breathe before the next challenge surfaced. Luis called him into the kitchen. His face a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "We've got a problem," he said, pointing to the walk-in fridge. Ray stepped inside and immediately saw the issue. Several trays of raw chicken had been improperly stored, and the temperature logs showed they'd been sitting at unsafe levels overnight. The health inspector's visit earlier in the week had been nerve-wracking, but this was worse. They couldn't serve the chicken, it was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "Throw it out," Ray said without hesitation. Luis raised an eyebrow. "That's half our chicken supply for tonight. What's the plan?" Ray thought quickly. "We'll adjust the menu. Highlight the other proteins, steak, fish, pasta. Get the servers to push the specials. If anyone asks for chicken, tell them we're out and recommend something else." Luis nodded, a flicker of approval crossing his face. "All right, boss. Let's make it work." As the day shifted into evening, the restaurant filled with the hum of weekend diners. Ray moved through the space like a conductor, orchestrating every detail. He checked in with customers, reassured servers, and kept the kitchen running smoothly despite the missing chicken. But then, in the middle of the dinner rush, disaster struck in the form of an angry customer. A man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive suit, called Ray over to his table. His steak, he claimed, was overcooked. Ray apologized sincerely and offered to replace the dish immediately. The man's tone grew sharper. "I didn't come here to wait another 20 minutes for a meal," he snapped. "This place has gone downhill. Where's the real manager?" Ray felt the word sting, but he didn't let it show. "I'm sorry we didn't meet your expectations tonight," he said evenly. "We'll do everything we can to make it right. If there's anything else I can do to improve your experience, please let me know." The man huffed but seemed slightly mollified. Ray walked back to the kitchen, his jaw clenched. He couldn't let one irate customer derail the entire night, but the interaction gnawed at him. Was this how everyone saw him, a temporary stand-in, unworthy of the role he was trying so hard to fill? Pushing those thoughts aside, Ray focused on the bigger picture. The night wasn't over, and the rest of the diners still needed his attention. He doubled down, checking every dish that left the kitchen and stepping in wherever he was needed. As the evening wound down, Ray noticed something remarkable. Despite the challenges, the staff had become a well-oiled machine. Servers communicated seamlessly with the kitchen, the busboys kept the dining room spotless, and even Luis, who had been a skeptic at the start of the week, seemed to trust Ray's decisions without question. By the time the last table cleared out and the staff began their closing duties, Ray felt a profound sense of pride. They had faced crisis after crisis, but they'd come through it stronger. After locking up, Ray sat in his car for a moment, letting the events of the day sink in. The words of the angry customer still lingered, but they were drowned out by the gratitude he felt for his team. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. As he drove home, Ray allowed himself a small smile. There were still 2 days left, and he knew they wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, he wasn't dreading them. He was ready. Sunday morning arrived, bringing with it a strange sense of quiet. Ray woke up to the realization that he was nearing the end of his grueling week as acting manager. While part of him was relieved that the finish line was in sight, another part felt the mounting pressure of making it through these final 2 days without a major misstep. Sundays at the restaurant were known for their unpredictability, a mix of brunch crowds, families, and the occasional high-maintenance regulars who treated the dining room like their personal kingdom. Ray arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, determined to stay ahead of whatever challenges the day might bring. As he stepped inside, the air was filled with the rich aroma of brewing coffee and sizzling bacon. A few of the kitchen staff were already prepping for brunch, and Luis, as always, was at the helm. "Morning, boss," Luis said with a slight grin. It wasn't mockery this time, it was camaraderie. "Morning, Luis," Ray replied, grabbing a clipboard to review the day's reservations and prep lists. The schedule looked manageable, but Ray had learned not to trust appearances. The first sign of trouble came just as the brunch crowd was settling in. A server approached Ray, her face pale with anxiety. "Ray, we've got a problem. Table 8 is complaining about their wait time. They're getting really upset." Ray sighed inwardly but kept his expression calm. Table 8 was a group of 4 older women who had a reputation for being demanding. He approached their table with a warm smile. "Good morning, ladies. I heard there's been a delay with your order, and I want to personally apologize," he said. "Let me check on your food right away, and I'll make sure it's out to you as soon as possible." The women glared at him, but one of them softened slightly. "We've been waiting nearly half an hour. This isn't the kind of service we're used to here." "I completely understand," Ray said, maintaining his composure. "Let me make it up to you. I'll take care of your drinks today, and I'll bring out a little something from the kitchen to tide you over." He hurried back to the kitchen, where he found Luis plating a stack of pancakes. "Luis, I need a favor, something small and quick for table 8. They're getting restless." Luis nodded, pulling out a tray of freshly baked muffins. "Take these. They're still warm." Ray delivered the muffins himself, and the gesture seemed to smooth things over. The women smiled, thanked him, and even complimented the muffins. A potential disaster averted. As the brunch rush intensified, Ray found himself darting between tasks. He helped refill coffee cups, cleared tables, and even stepped into the dish pit when the staff there fell behind. His movements were purposeful, his energy unwavering. He was beginning to understand that leadership wasn't about being everywhere at once but about knowing where you were most needed. Just as the brunch crowd began to thin, another challenge emerged. A young couple with a toddler had been seated near the center of the dining room, and the child had begun to cry, loudly. Other diners started to glance over, their expressions ranging from mild concern to outright annoyance. Ray approached the couple with a sympathetic smile. "Hi there. I can see your little one is having a tough time. Can I bring over some crayons or maybe a small snack to help?" The mother looked frazzled but grateful. "That would be amazing. He's just restless because we've been waiting so long." Ray nodded. "I'll check on your food right now and be back with something for him." He returned with a small plate of crackers and a set of crayons, which seemed to pacify the toddler. The couple's gratitude was palpable, and the surrounding diners relaxed as the crying subsided. By the time the brunch shift ended, Ray felt like he'd run a marathon. But there was no time to rest. Dinner service loomed, and Sundays often brought an influx of large groups and late-night diners. As the evening began, Ray noticed a peculiar tension among the staff. Servers whispered to one another, and Luis looked unusually tight-lipped. Ray pulled one of the waitresses aside. "What's going on?" She hesitated before answering. "There's a rumor going around that the owner, Mr. Carter, might show up tonight. People are nervous." Ray's stomach tightened. Carter's return wasn't supposed to happen until Monday, but the possibility of an early visit added a new layer of stress. If Carter walked in tonight and found anything out of place, the entire week's efforts could be undermined. Determined to keep everyone focused, Ray called a quick staff meeting in the kitchen. "Listen up, everyone. I know there's talk that Carter might come in tonight. If he does, we'll treat him like any other customer, professional, efficient, and polite. But for now, let's focus on the job. We've been through worse this week, and we've handled it. We've got this." The pep talk seemed to bolster the team's morale, and the dinner service began without incident. Ray kept a close eye on every detail, ensuring that plates were perfect and service was seamless. Midway through the night, a large group arrived without a reservation, throwing the seating arrangements into disarray. Ray quickly reorganized tables, balancing the needs of the group with those of the existing diners. It was a logistical headache, but the staff rallied behind him, and the group left satisfied. As the final diners trickled out, Ray felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The night hadn't been easy, but they'd managed to pull it off. Carter hadn't shown up after all, but the looming possibility had kept everyone sharp. After the last table was cleared and the lights dimmed, Ray gathered the staff for a brief meeting. "I just want to say thank you," he began. "This week hasn't been easy, but you've all stepped up in ways I didn't expect. I'm proud to work with each of you." The team broke into applause, and for a moment, Ray felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He'd started the week as the reluctant dishwasher thrust into a role he didn't think he could handle. But now, as he looked around at his team, he realized that leadership wasn't about being perfect, it was about showing up, adapting, and earning the trust of the people around you. Sunday ended on a high note, but Ray knew the final day awaited. Tomorrow, Carter would return, and Ray's performance would face its ultimate test. Monday morning arrived with a weight that Ray couldn't shake. It was the final day of his week as acting manager, and the stakes felt higher than ever. Carter, the owner, would be back by midday. Every decision Ray had made, every challenge he had navigated, and every ounce of effort he had poured into keeping the restaurant afloat would be under scrutiny. Despite the confidence he had gained over the past week, doubt crept in. What if Carter found something amiss? What if he dismissed all of Ray's work as a failure? Ray shook off the thoughts as he arrived at the restaurant early, greeted by the soft hum of the prep staff starting their tasks. He took a moment to walk through the empty dining room, the light streaming through the windows casting a golden glow on the polished tables. This space had been his battlefield for the past 7 days, a place where he had been tested in every conceivable way. Today, it felt different. It felt like his. The morning began smoothly enough. Ray met with Luis to review the inventory and ensure they were stocked for the day. The team seemed unusually energetic, perhaps sensing that this was a pivotal moment for their temporary leader. Ray worked side by side with the servers, setting up for the lunch rush and double-checking the cleanliness of every corner of the restaurant. His attention to detail was sharper than ever, fueled by a need to leave no room for criticism. As the clock ticked closer to noon, Ray felt a growing tension among the staff. Carter's impending arrival hung over them like a storm cloud. Some of the newer employees whispered nervously, while the veterans maintained a stoic demeanor, though their glances toward the door betrayed their unease. Ray, determined to set the tone, gathered everyone for a quick pep talk. "Listen up," he began, his voice steadied despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I know today feels different because Carter's coming back. But we've faced everything this week together, crowds, complaints, last-minute problems, and we've come out stronger every time. Today is no different. Let's just do what we do best, take care of our customers and work as a team." The staff nodded, their expressions softening. It was clear they trusted him now, in a way that would have seemed impossible at the start of the week. That trust gave Ray a sense of calm he hadn't expected. Whatever happened today, he knew he had given his all. As the lunch rush began, the restaurant filled quickly. Families, businesspeople, and regulars streamed in, creating a familiar buzz of activity. Ray moved through the dining room, greeting customers and checking in with the servers. He felt like a conductor, orchestrating the flow of service with precision. The kitchen hummed with efficiency, thanks to the trust and camaraderie he had built with Luis and the team. Then, at 12:47 p.m., the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Carter walked through the door. He was a tall man in his late 50s, his presence commanding even in casual attire. His sharp eyes swept over the restaurant, taking in every detail. The staff straightened visibly as he passed, their movements more deliberate. Carter made his way to the bar, where he sat and ordered a coffee. Ray took a deep breath and approached. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," Ray said with a smile, extending a hand. "How was your trip?" Carter shook his hand firmly, his expression unreadable. "It was good, Ray. I hear you've had quite a week." Ray chuckled nervously. "You could say that. But the team has been incredible. They've really stepped up." Carter nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Let's see how things look today." For the next hour, Carter watched everything. He observed the servers, the kitchen staff, and even the way Ray handled minor issues, a spilled drink here, a delayed dish there. Ray could feel Carter's eyes on him, but he forced himself to focus on the tasks at hand. He interacted with customers, addressed a minor scheduling issue, and even stepped into the kitchen to help expedite orders when a sudden surge threatened to overwhelm the line. Finally, Carter asked Ray to join him at a table near the back of the restaurant. Ray sat across from him, his palms slightly damp despite his calm demeanor. "All right," Carter began, setting down his coffee cup. "Tell me how it went." Ray took a deep breath. "It was challenging, to say the least. We had a health inspection on day one, equipment failures, staffing issues, and more complaints than I could count. But through it all, the team pulled together. We adapted, improvised, and kept the restaurant running. I won't pretend everything was perfect, but I believe we upheld the standards you expect here." Carter's expression remained neutral as he listened. When Ray finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "I've heard good things from the staff," he said finally. "Luis told me you handled the health inspection like a pro. Even the servers, who can be a tough crowd, seem to respect you. That's not easy to earn." Ray felt a wave of relief but kept his composure. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. That means a lot." "But," Carter continued, "being a manager isn't just about surviving a tough week. It's about consistency, about making decisions that benefit the business in the long term. So tell me this, if you were in my shoes, what's the one thing you'd change about how we run this place?" The question caught Ray off guard. He paused, considering his answer. "I'd invest more in cross-training the staff," he said finally. "This week showed me how valuable it is to have people who can step into different roles when needed. It keeps things running smoothly, even when things go wrong." Carter nodded slowly. "Interesting. And what about you?" Did this week change how you see yourself? Ray hesitated, then spoke honestly. It did. I started the week thinking I wasn't cut out for this. But now, I see that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, listening to your team, and finding solutions together. I learned a lot, and I'm grateful for the experience. Carter studied him for a moment, then stood. Good answer. Let's see how dinner goes. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Carter stayed until closing, quietly observing but never interfering. When the final customers left and the staff began their closing duties, Carter called Ray into his office. You've done well, he said, his tone warmer now. Better than I expected. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure you had it in you. But you proved me wrong. The team respects you, and the restaurant is in good shape. I'm impressed. Ray felt a swell of pride but kept his response humble. Thank you, Mr. Carter. That means a lot. Carter nodded. You've earned it. Now get some rest. You deserve it. As Ray left the office and stepped into the quiet night, he felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The week had tested him in every way, but he had emerged stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever came next.